say good afternoon or good evening. I know some of you are joining from international regions, and we want to welcome each and every one of you. So first, my name is Damaris Choti. I'm the coordinator of student and alumni programs here at the African Studies Center at Michigan State University. And for those joining us for the first time or joining the Tea Time for the first time, this is a series. Tea Time is one of our center's signature monthly events. And we're so very glad to have you join us, especially those, as I said, joining us for the first time. And as I've mentioned, this is a series that happens monthly. So we have monthly events, tea time events. And on April, this coming month will be our last event for this semester. And I will share the registration link and other information maybe on this chat for you to consider. And that session will be hearing, like the session will be hosting students that have participated in education abroad program, the participants from last year to 2025. And this is a program that is sponsored by MSU Tanzania Partnership Program here at MSU. And you will hear more if and when you're able to join, more about what the experiences those students that participated in education abroad are. So we invite and welcome you to join us for that last session of the semester. So that said, I wish to welcome and thank you for joining us for the African Tea Time session today that is going to be centering on multilateralism, China's increasing footprint in Africa. And as highlighted in some global conversations, like let's say the World Economic Forum, some of you who are interested in international politics may be, viewing or checking out some news from those forums. It's very clear that our international order is shifting, and what that means, it brings new alliances, new actors, and new opportunities for sure. And we see Africa's growing engagement with China alongside with other platforms like BRICS. What that means is that it places the continent in a unique position to help shape the future of global cooperation, I would say. And you can imagine this makes today's presentation very timely because the world is changing for sure. And when it's changing, the actors and partners are also changing. And today, the discussion is going to really focus on China's engagement with Africa and what that means. How are the relations shifting, changing for the better? For what does that mean exactly? So we are pleased to invite our presenter, who is Arhin Acheampong. And Mr. Acheampong is the Deputy Director of the Afro-Sino Center of International Relations, which is based in Ghana, but their research covers the entire continent. And it's mainly focused on the relationship between, or the relations, not relationships per se, but the relations and engagements between China and the continent of Africa, China's footprint in Africa, that is. So Mr. Arhin Acheampong is not new to MSU. He's an alum of Michigan State, and we've been able to engage with their center, Afro-Sino Center of International Relations, for a long time, I would say over 5-6 years. And Arhin joins us every year to be able to update us on what's new research in this area, because their research is spans across many African countries. And today he is coming to specifically engage us on this discussion on where are we or what's new about these relations, China-Africa relations. So, Mr. Acheampong, I'm really pleased to welcome you here. You know, you're not new. We've worked for many years. And today I'm very, very pleased to welcome you again to lead us in this discussion. Thanks and welcome.
Thank you so much, Choti, for having me again. Every year I look forward to this tea time presentation because it's important to us on the continent and also to the MSU community because we give the MSU community an update or some sort of a summary of what Africa-China relations look like over the year and what that means for the United States of America, what that means for scholars, especially emerging scholars and international relations. So I always look forward to this encounter. And as always, I would rather this session it's as interactive as possible. So, Doc, if you don't mind, as I speak, if there are any questions in the chat, you can stop me and then draw my attention to it. Don't hesitate to raise your hand if you want, and then just chip in something or ask a question or just clarify something at any point through this conversation so that we can have a very lively session. And so usually when we do this, we don't want it to be so scholarly and more like a research thing and bombard you with data and all of that. So I'm going to go ahead and sort of give you a narration as to the best of my knowledge so that you can understand what is happening globally now and also what is happening with Africa-China engagement. It's so good to see Professor Manson. Prof, so good to see you. So like Dr. Acheampong said, my name is Arhin Acheampong. I'm Deputy Director for the Afro-Sino Center of International Relations. Professor Manson was our board member, one of our board members. She still is an honorary board member with us, and MSU has been very that we do. So it's always good to see Professor Manson. So in ASCIR, we look at relations in three focal areas. That is the economy, which deals with investment, infrastructure, and trade between Africa and China. We also do the environment, which looks at the environmental footprint of China's engagements with Africa. And then finally, we do education and culture, which looks at Africa-China people-to-people engagement and educational activities. That is in terms of educational opportunities for African youth, especially emerging scholars. But one of our cross-cutting areas is security, and I'm fortunate enough to also head the security research group. So this research is going to focus on these areas. Dr. Choti already mentioned, we are looking at multilateralism and China's increasing footprint in Africa. For the introduction, and I just want us to get a picture of China's expanding presence on the continent. Now, China's expanding presence focuses or is seen in about four main spheres, which is the economy, the diplomatic sphere, the security nexus, as well as the political sphere. So you see that China's presence in Africa is usually captured under one of these spheres. So when it comes to the economy, you will find that China, by far, in terms of bilateral partnerships and collaboration, is Africa's leading infrastructure investor, is Africa's leading trade partner, as well as Africa's leading investment partner. So when it comes to the economy, the key aspects of the economy, China is leading on the continent of Africa. So China's economic footprint in Africa is massive and cannot be underrated. Professor Manson has a powerful documentary on the Tazara Railway, which is an example of China's mega economic footprint in terms of investment on the continent. Also, if you look at the diplomatic aspects of it, it's become apparent that Africa has become a very, very strategic partner who is leveraging its historic relations or its historic solidarity with China, as well as its contemporary strategy with China to enhance its global dominance. Diplomacy globally, just beyond China, other blocs are realizing the importance of Africa. And so we have seen a lot of US Africa summits going on. We have seen a lot of UK Africa summits every year happening. We have seen EU Africa summits. We have even seen Brazil China-African summits. And now Africa is moving beyond these summits into being crucial part of regional blocs. For example, like Dr. Choti mentioned, you see the BRICS, which has become a formidable bloc in the world now in terms of geopolitics and multilateralism. Africa plays a key role through South Africa as a member, a founding member of BRICS. We've seen that as at last year or 2 years ago, Africa became a member of the G20. So now the G20 is G20 plus by virtue of Africa's involvement. Also, you see that the Forum for China-Africa Cooperation has become a major point of discussion because it has really institutionalized Africa-China relations, right? And so every 3 years, we have a rotation of summits between Africa and China and an African country in Africa and then in China, where almost all the heads of states, usually you have about 50 heads of states attending the FOCAC, which is the Forum for China-Africa Cooperation, every 3 years to talk and to plan for the next 3 years of what the Africa-China relations should look like. And based on FOCAC, the African Union is actually using the model to shape its engagement with the rest of the world. So there are documents that the African Union has designed based on FOCAC to sort of shape Africa's diplomatic engagement. So when it comes to diplomacy, plays a key role in Africa as well. And then we look at the security engagement. Now, we see that China has moved beyond its strategic military collaboration to physical presence, or what we call hard power in Africa. Before, China didn't have military bases in Africa, but now China has military bases. China is forming alliances with African states. China is physically, militarily present on the continent. China plus Chinese weapons are on the continent. So with regards to security, China plays a key role. And so we are going to juxtapose the dominant areas in respect of Africa-China relations to the global politics and geopolitics. So because of geopolitics and great power competition, Africa-China dynamics have become very, very important. And so you'll find that everyone is interested in what is going on between Africa and China. The West is interested, even the global South is interested in what is happening between Africa and China and what this means for the future of our world. And so this engagement has become very pivotal, and therefore it's important for us to understand Africa-China relations and then see the lessons that we can learn, and also how the United States, as well as the rest of the world, can leverage on what Africa and China are doing in shaping the world, or the world that we want to build together. So I want to use real life examples to explain what I'm trying to point out. So, for example, the Canadian Prime Minister, during a speech in Davos at the 56th Annual Forum, suggested quite clearly that the West should consider the order, the shift that is happening within the global order. Actually, he stated that the global order wasn't shifting and that it changed, and that the rest of the world must come to the reality or the realization that the global order has shifted. I just want to read a quote from his speech. He says this, and I quote, that when the rules no longer protect you, you must protect yourself. Hegemons cannot continually monetize their relationships. He says again that allies will diversify and increase their options. Then finally, he says this. He says the question for middle powers like Canada It's not whether to adopt to the new reality. The question is, we must, and he says, and I would encourage everyone to read or to go back. It's on YouTube. Just listen to the speech by the Prime Minister of Canada. It's actually become a very popular speech recently when he met some leaders from the Scandinavian countries. They reference that speech. And it sets the pace. It sets the pace for how the rest of the world were going to consider, U.S. hegemony, and whether or not we are moving from a U.S. hegemon or U.S. dominated global dynamic, or we are moving to a multilateral global order. So these concerns over American actions, particularly since the beginning of 2016, ranges from Greenland to Venezuela and now Iran. So we know what happened when the United States decided to go, or the president of the United States decided to go after Greenland. We saw how the West, and when I say the West, I mean Europe, mobilized, and how Europe came together for the maybe very unprecedented manner to say that no, we are not going to allow this to happen. And that also fueled, this perception that maybe it's about time that we look at a more multilateral or a more diversified alliance, right? Instead of putting all our eggs in this one hegemon, which is the United States. Now, this unprecedented turn of events, of course, in Iran, that has caused traditional allies to take an orthodox stance, gives credence to the shift from hegemony to multilateralism. What I'm trying to say here is that not for the first time, but for the first time in a very long time, even to the surprise of President Trump, that the United Kingdom decided it was not going to go offensive with the U.S. With regards to the Iranian war, right? So we are seeing Europe really question whether or not they are going to support the United States in this excursion in Iran. We've also seen what this has meant for NATO, which basically, of course, remember that the only time NATO has been invoked to really take an action was when the United States decided to go to war. And now NATO is not willing to do that. So this can be described as unprecedented. And many are pointing to the fact that this adds to the shift that the US in its relationship with China, with its allies. And so these allies are forming and realigning with other powers, especially China. And this is why this is important, because these alignments are going to China, and we'll see this as we move on. Now, it would always seem easier for the United States to rebuild its diplomatic relations if it is united internally, or if there is some sort of united stance on particular issues, right? But in this case, what we are seeing is that internally, the United States also seems to be failing to unite its citizens towards its leadership on the global stage. Now, a critical example of this is the support of United States citizens for this war that is going on in Iran. I think it's now almost below 30%, right? So less than 30% of Americans support United States excursion or war with Iran. And this is not good as a student of international security. This is not good for any country, right? Because if you're going to war, you basically need the political will, which the United States has through the president. You need Congress, again, as part of the political war. You need the economy, the finance to finance that war, which again the United States has. And then finally, you need the people. And for this triangular thing to work. And now the United States doesn't have the people. And so the United States is struggling to sell this war to Americans or to its citizens. So without that, it's very difficult for the United States to to sort of unite and rally behind its leadership, to exert itself, or to be in a position, right, to be effective as a global hegemon. Another example I just want to, and I'll be doing quite some reading here, because I want to refer to what is happening now, to the director for the National Counterterrorism Center, who I think yesterday or a few days ago just resigned from his position. And in his letter, he says, I just want to read portions of his resignation letter. He states, and I quote, "President Trump, after much reflections, I have decided to resign from my position as director of the NCTC, effective today. I cannot support sending the next generation off to fight and die in a war that serves no benefit to the American people, nor justify the costs of American lives. I pray you would reflect on what we are doing in Iran and who we are doing it for. The time for bold action is now. You can reverse course and chart a new path for our nation, or you can allow us to slip further towards decline and chaos." Now, this is the point that I want us to highlight. The point that we can slip further towards decline and chaos, right? And that is an admission that the US is slipping in terms of its global position and its global dominance, right? And so if this war continues, US global dominance will see would take some hit, right? So that is basically what this resignation letter is saying, which is very critical for whether or not the world is shifting towards multilateralism or the existing global order. Now, I just want to also quote Victor Gao, who is a Chinese academic, and he actually says that the world will look back to 2026 as the year of the end of Pax Americana. So Pax Americana is actually America's dominance and America's hegemony, or the year or the era of America, right? So these are propositions that people are putting out there, which appears to resonate with especially even allies of traditional allies of the United States. So I think that whilst US soft power and diplomatic sovereignty appears to decline, as it is now more frequently addressed as a regime, and as China calls on it to respect the rule-based institution. Now, this is important. This is important because before, the United States will refer to government that they consider illegitimate as regimes. But if anyone is following what is going on with the Iranian war and whatever is happening, more and more we are seeing scholars or commentators refer to the United States and Israel as regimes. Now, these were things you would see, or these were categorizations that the US would give to countries which were not democratic, or countries which were not basically democratic, right? But now the United States, more and more, in a very unprecedented way, is being referred to as a regime, right? And these concerns are not just coming from outside. Internally, we've seen American senators and people in Congress who are suggesting that the president is acting unilaterally, and what is going on undermines the Constitution. We've had people within the United States refer or even suggest that what the president is doing amounts to war crimes, right? And for the US, who used to call on countries to adhere to rule-based systems, is now being told by China to respect the rule-based system. And these rule-based institutions are institutions that the United States actually led or continues to lead and had put in place. So now you're getting China, who used to not be considered as a country or as a power that respected these institutions, now referring America or advising America to respect them. So again, I'm pointing to this shift, in US's how the United States is seen by its allies and by its competitors. Now, again, after the Davos summit, I just want to point to 4 things that have happened and that should be concerning to all of us. So after the Davos summit, the Canadian Prime Minister announced that it was now going to have strategic partnerships with China. And indeed, the partnership agreement that was agreed between Canada and China is huge. Again, another unprecedented move where Canada has basically opened its automobile industry and has opened itself to China, which wasn't a thing actually, which hasn't been a thing for I don't know if I can even say for a very long time. Canada has always and has been a natural ally of the United States and has opened its economy and borders and everything to the US. But for the first time, Professor Manson can, if there's some history there that I don't know, can maybe let me know. But in my life, we've seen Canada open up to China. This is unprecedented. Now, the second thing that has happened is the Chinese delegation that were in Venezuela, right? So just before the Venezuelan attack, we saw that a Chinese delegation was in Venezuela at the time, and they hadn't even left when the attack happened. Now, this signals South America and a lot of countries in South America are now opening up to China, which, of course, diplomatically and security-wise, is not good for the United States because the United States does not want China or Russia anywhere close to its borders. And that is why Greenland, of course, became an issue. So to see South American allies trying to form alliances with China, it's a big thing, and it's something that we have to look out for and to consider. Now, the other thing too is that just last week, the British Prime Minister was in China. He visited China, and he has announced since the Davos summit in January that they are willing to negotiate and they are willing to open up and to form new strategic alliances with China. Now, this is huge again, because like the President Trump rightly noted, the UK has been the United States maybe oldest and natural ally over the years, and for the UK to start this huge strategic alliance with China, also it's a point that we have to be concerned or to look out or to try to assess and to understand. And then finally, we know that China is I'm struggling to use the word support, but China seems to be involved in this war between Iran and the United States and Israel, and China seems to be on the side of Iran. Interestingly, and this I don't know whether it is funny or just interesting or what. When the president of the United States, President Trump, was calling for countries to help, China was one of the countries he called. He asked China to help so that the Straits of Hormuz can be opened, right? You would, as a natural competitor and China's and the US's biggest competitor, you will not expect the United States to call on China, especially when US intelligence points to the fact that China is actually on Iran's side and supporting Iran as well as Russia in this, and actually giving Iran GPS location and targets of the United States to strike. So that comes off as very interesting. And for the US to be calling on China also sends that signal, which is not necessarily good for the United States in terms of its posture in the world. Now, why is all this important, and what does this mean for Africa or Africa-China engagements? One, these are some thoughts that I have. One, that Africa has to deal yes, Africa has had to deal with the scrutiny. Has had to deal with scrutiny of its relations with China. Now, this is very important. I use the word scrutiny or has been scrutinized. Africa-China relations has been scrutinized. Now, if you look at scrutiny, that means that it's usually done to look for the negatives, right? So there's been a lot of work scrutinizing Africa, China. What we as a center are doing or are trying to do is to shift from scrutiny to assessment, right? To look for ways we can improve Africa, China relations, to look at ways that we can, of course, critically assess Africa, China relations. But because Africa, China relations has been scrutinized, there's a lot of lessons to be learned, right? Especially by these new powers or these new partners who are trying to form alliances with China. So Canada, the UK, and even the South American countries can learn, from Africa-China relations, because there's been a lot of scholarly work that has been done to either scrutinize or to assess Africa-China engagement. So Africa presents this to the rest of the world or the emerging partners of China. Now, the second thing is that Africa has exhibited agency in its relations with China. Now, this is important. Africa has shaped or has helped shape its relations with China. And this relationship has led to, like I pointed out earlier, Africa's dominance and what Africa's new position, on the global stage. And so these new partners can also learn from Africa and, capitalize on Africa's agency to see how we are going to shape, if indeed there's going to be a new emerging multilateral order, how we are going to shape this. So Africa-China relations serves as a very important benchmark for these new partners of China to look at. The third point is that lessons have been learned and strategic partnerships have been forged, right? So if you look at the FOCAC summit from 2003, we as a center have done an analysis of how the relationship has gone from 2003 to 2025, and you could see that there's been a lot of lessons learned, and you could see the changes in scope, the change in approach, even the change in language between Africa and Chinese counterparts, and how this relationship has been forged over the years. So the FOCAC document can also be a very good place to start for all these new partners who are now trying to forge new relationships or new relations with China. This is not to say it's going to be the same, but this is to say that there are lessons to be learned in Africa-China relations. The fourth point is that the rest of the world can benefit tremendously from Africa's experience engaging with China. Now, the similarity between what we're seeing between Africa, China, and the rest of the world, and now Canada, the UK, and all of that, is that the concerns that were expressed when Africa-China engagement became topical are being expressed again now. People are, the United States and other allies are warning, even, the opposition parties in the UK are warning Britain and Canada that, you can't trust China, you can't do this with China, this relationship is not going to go far, you can't, So all of these things were said when Africa started forging its relations with China. And so based on that and the lessons learned, this gives all of these nations, an opportunity to learn and to benefit from, how Africa has charted this course with China. Then the fifth point is that Africa can position itself strategically to become a leader in the emerging global order, if indeed there's going to be a new global order, right? So by virtue of Africa and China's relationship, Africa can really position itself, to And we've seen some of these things. We've seen some of these stunts, right? Before Stemmer and Co. stood up to President Trump, we saw what the president of South Africa did. Refusing to hand over the presidency or the gobble to a junior diplomat who was not qualified to take the G20 presidency officially from South Africa to the United States. And we saw the pressure and what he had to go through, Ramaphosa had to deal with and had to address. So these are things that again, the British Prime Minister can learn from. I'm sure he's probably also, studying what happened, how Ramaphosa dealt with it, the support he got internally, and what that meant for his political future. Just today, we are seeing that even the British Prime Minister is betting on his next election on how he's able to stand up to Trump. And that if he's able to stand up to Trump, that might actually give him a better chance of winning the elections, right? So these dynamics have already happened with Africa. These dynamics are not new. It may be new to them, but it's not new to Africa. And so they can learn from Africa's experience with China. Now, I'll conclude with these final thoughts, and then we can have some discussions if there are any questions or thoughts. And I'm happy to engage and to share my personal views or some of the work we have done with you. Now, when President Obama was in Ghana, sometime in the early 2000s, I think, yes, when he was in Ghana, there was a very controversial statement he made that Africa does not need strong men, but Africa needs strong institutions. Now, it was controversial because at the time, even myself and some journalists thought that the reverse was true, that Africa actually does not need strong institutions, but it needs strong men because Africa had the strong institutions, and that Obama was thinking about strong men in a different way. So he was thinking about strong men as people who wanted to yield power. He had the picture of Muammar Gaddafi in mind, strong men as people like Mugabe who didn't want to leave power. But some people made the argument that you actually need strong-willed men to make institutions work. And by strong men, they meant strong, and again, please, men, women, strong leaders, right? So they needed strong leaders who will be able to allow institutions to work, and that you needed that kind of strength to not be power drunk, right? You needed leaders who were strong to say that they were going to subject themselves to institutions, right? And so now, as what is going on in the US and what President Donald Trump is doing, local commentators are actually now referring President Obama or going back to this speech to say that maybe the United States, what the problem is with the United States now is that they don't have a strong president. Because they have a president who is not strong now, the institutions cannot even hold, because Trump seemed to be going past the institutions. So if these institutions are there and you don't have a leader who is committed to democratic principles, even the institutions will cave in. And as we are seeing with, how Trump refers to the Supreme Court in his State of the Nation's address in Congress, what he said about the Supreme Court and what he decided to even do in terms of circumventing the Supreme Court decision. Now, whether or not this is a war or an excursion, whether Congress approval is needed to declare war, all of these things. So my final thoughts are that as I was going through all of this, that's what I was thinking about, that yes, maybe we are really not, America is not losing its position yet. Maybe America is in a phase because it has a leader that has sort of dented America's posture in the global stage. And this can easily be corrected if there's change of leadership. And this can be corrected if, for example, there's a leader or America, the America that everyone knew is back. Now, finally, one of the reasons why, again, this particular session every year is important and key to me is that one thing that America has that China doesn't have is exactly what is happening now. That the American public is able to hold its government accountable. That the American government can actually share opposing views from its government. That the American public, the American people, can say that we do not support this and it will matter. It is not the same with China. And so Africa-China relations and Africa-US relations, and what this means for geopolitics and the rest of the world, is that in as much as we believe that we need to critically assess, what is going on between Africa and China, I personally believe that the United States cannot lose its influence on the global stage, not because of the leaders, not because of the leaders, not because of the political class, but because of the American people, and the ability to openly criticize their government and openly support, even in cases like the Iranian war, positions that they didn't hold, now holding those positions. We've seen what is going on with the Free Palestine movement. It wasn't like this before, but the American public or the American people are able to stand up every point in time to the occasion and challenge the status quo and impact the global order. And so we need that America to be alive and well, and we need that America to be uh, uh, visible and strong within the global architecture to safeguard all of us. Thank you so much, Dr. Choti, for another opportunity to engage. And I'm more than happy to engage in any discussion. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Arhin, for the talk that highlights research and all the other work that you do to get to understand more and learn deeper about US, not US, but China engagement with Africa. And I honestly look forward to this presentation because I always have one big question about Africa's agency in all this. And I'm glad today you even answered before I could ask, because every year I just want to know, because previously people have said, does this look like a new scramble for Africa? Since when China has engaged with Africa for a long time, and as you mentioned, Dr. Monson here has done research in that field, and it's been for a long time. I mean, the relationship has been there from, I wouldn't even mention the year, maybe Dr. Monson can help us here, but it's been there. But maybe I would say about 10 years ago, somehow something changed or something was more evident where we saw China, the engagement with Africa intensified for some reasons and in some ways. And I believe that's how your institution was formed, to get to understand more that what has changed. Why is this new relationship becoming more evident? So I don't think I have a question. My question would have been, in your assessment on, or based on your research, what do you think does Africa seem to have, a space in all this? Are we still having a voice in what the relationship should look like? Do we have a portion in this partnership? And it feels like you've responded. If you have something more to say, please do. If you have examples of what you can call evidences that Africa is also engaged in a meaningful way, you can please add that.
Right. I have a few to say. And again, like you rightly said, Africa's relationship with, say, the United States and its previous, colonial powers was such that Africa didn't have the opportunity to actually inform or influence what that looked like, right? So, for example, of course, we were colonized and then you were given independence and certain agreements were signed. And again, those paternalistic relationships, as described by President Ramaphosa, that is Africa and Europe's relationship, he calls it paternalistic. Those relationships are still reflected even today. right? And so when it came to China, people, including us and our center, decided that no, for this one, we have a say. For this one, Africa can actually put out its voice, and Africa can shape how this relationship looks like. And that is why we are seeing what we are seeing. And that is why I think that Africa can even position itself as a leader within this multilateral, because it has gone through this phase and it has done so very well. First of all, Africa, through its relationship with China, has been able to campaign for a permanent seat at the Security Council, right? So getting increasing sense of Africa within the Security Council. Now, Africa and China and the rest of the world are pushing for veto powers within the Security Council to be removed, right? Africa fought after all these years, and I would argue that, again, because of its relationship with China and the global south through BRICS, Africa fought to be part of the G20. This fight to be part of the G20 didn't start now, right? You're seeing that. And interesting fact, again, now when Africa is added to the G20, you would expect that it will become G21, right? But they don't call it G20, the G20 plus. So we still have to fight. Now we are plus. We are not G21, we are G20 plus. So there's still a lot of fight to fight. There's still a lot to do. But again, Africa is exerting itself. Again, we are seeing Africa, like I said, with the FOCAC. We've seen that. One thing I wanted to say, an important thing which has to do with our center, is that we proposed to the African Union that the African Union should have a seat at FOCAC. When we proposed that, initially they thought it wasn't possible, and it was, but they pushed that proposal forward. Guess what? China admitted the African Union to FOCAC. So now the African Union has a seat at FOCAC. That is one. Two, before the FOCAC that just happened, I think last year in 2025 or late 2024, the African Union was asked to, sort of, African nations are asked to bring their input, right, as to the next 3 years, what should happen and how they should. One of the proposals we sent was that we need to invest more in research, that has to do with Africa-China relations. Guess what? When the FOCAC report came out, China and Africa had committed to invest in about, I think they said 30 research centers, or to create 30 new Africa-China research centers across the globe. So, and for the first time this year, a lot of scholars have agreed that there's been a lot of indigenous contribution by African scholars in what became the FOCAC action plan, for the next 3 years. So Africa's voice is now being heard, Doc, and I agree with you, and it's true that yes, we may not be where we are, but we are seeing Africa exerting itself, and we are seeing a change in what this looks like. And like I said, for example, the African Union has decided now it's going to model its relationship with the rest of the world by what it's doing with FOCAC now, because in FOCAC, they've been able to add their voice and shape it the way they want it. And so now, I know in the coming years, we are not going to have the US-Africa Summit always happening in the US. Now the US will also have to come to Africa to engage Africans on African soil, right? We have 55 African leaders or 54 African leaders going to the UK to have a UK-Africa Summit. They will now also have to rotate. So we are seeing Africa now putting its voice out there, and I'm sure these changes will come. So that is just to add to the observation that you made.
Thank you so much, Arhin. That's a great response. So I see 2 questions on the chat, and I'll start with the first one from Queen. Does China sell military contracts to African nations for weapons, vehicles, etc., or just use them as a location to create proxies and bases within the continent to increase hegemony within the region?
Yes, so it's both. It's both. So for example, with Doc, please, can you hear me clearly?
Yes, I can.
So with what is happening in, say, the conflict in Sudan, of course, there's Chinese weapons China is selling weapons to Sudan, and that is actually shaping now what people say. Initially China had a posture of non-interference, right? And now with Chinese weapons infiltrating the continent, people are questioning Chinese non-interference policy or position, right? And what China is saying.
Oh, you are frozen
Business.
a bit. Oh,
Okay. Is it good now?
yes, it is.
Okay. So like in the Iranian case,
Oh, frozen again, Arhin.
we are not supporting.
I think it's
Oh
the
boy,
internet that is not very stable, but
stable. Okay. So
okay.
I'll try and then wrap on that. So I'm saying that yes, is
Oh,
in the case of Iran. Dr. Toti, is it good now?
it was breaking, but maybe you can continue and let's see how.
Yes. So I was saying that in the case of Iran, China is saying that what he's doing is business. I mean, China has the right to sell to any buyer who wants to buy its weapons, just like the US sells weapons to, everyone. So yes, so China is saying that yes, of course, my weapons are there. It is still non-interference, but we're just doing business. So to answer your question directly, yes, China is not only there through military collaboration or through its proxies or just building bases. China is actually selling weapons, and Chinese weapons are in the system. And that has also been a major concern for African leaders and Africa security experts, the infiltration of Chinese weapons. So yes, it's both.
Thank you. Queen, if you have a follow-up question, you can type or just unmute yourself and ask. But for right now, thank you, Ahin, for that response. I will go to the second question from Isaiah, and he's asking, I know some of the US and other national multilateral organizations unintentionally cause some smaller countries to become dependent on these organizations. So do you think that these foreign aid programs for the African continent have created dependency for some African countries?
Well, yes and no. Yes, broadly, yes. But I would say that the narrative is also shifting. I remember when I was in Michigan State, that was when this whole thing of um, Mombisa Moyo, I'm getting the name wrong, talked about the aid thing, right? That we should stop the aid, move from. I don't know if someone can just remind me of the book that actually advocated and talked about, spoke vehemently against aid, right? And then started promoting the idea of dead aid. Yes, thank you so much, Enofa. Dead aid, right? That aid wasn't helping, and that we should move from aid to investment. Now, we've seen African leaders and actually some African countries form policy around that. So, for example, 8 years ago, the president of Ghana came up with this whole idea of Ghana beyond aid, right? So, this was all um, in response to this new shift. So, I would say that in the by 2014, 2015, all the way through 2018, the discussion about aid, and a shift from aid to investment started. And now, so for example, let's use US aid. When US cut its US aid program, of course, Africa was supposed to be the most impacted. But African leaders and African countries quickly, after the announcement of the aid and the aid wasn't coming, reorganized. And we've not seen, of course, in some countries, they've been very devastating impact, right? Of, increasing child mortality and stuff like that, and increased dropouts and stuff like that. But again, we've seen that the devastating impact it would have had some decades ago is not like that anymore. Another example is that we've seen countries actually reject US aid, right? We've seen countries say that we don't want this deal. So there was a medical aid package that the president currently put together for some African countries. Some accepted, some didn't, right? We had the president of, I don't want to get a country wrong, but one African president recently just told the US president, after he invited him to come to the White House, that it is buyers who come to sellers don't go to buyers, right? So we are seeing a shift, and we are seeing African leaders. I think I froze again.
A little bit, but we can hear you. Oh, okay. You're done with that, right? Oh, hello? You can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Doc.
Sure. No, I was saying, yeah, you froze a little bit, but we were able to hear your thoughts until the end. Oh my, I'm hoping that Arhin didn't disappear.
Yes, that is back.
Oh, you're back.
Afraid
You're back. Okay.
my
So,
system was yes.
we understand. Thank you so much. And then there's a third question here. I don't see any other. And it's if you have any questions, please feel free to even unmute yourself and ask. But I'm going to read this question on the chat. What is one accomplishment you are most proud of that Africa has achieved?
That's a very difficult question. But I would say for now, and from our engagements with other, African institutions like the African Union and stuff, I think they would call monumental their ability to be part of the G20, one of the greatest achievements of in the past decades, that Africa finally got to be part of the G20. I think that is very important. I think that is very, very important for the continent. Doug, did I break again?
No, you did not. We can hear you very well now. The Afro-Sino Center is a great
Okay.
achievement. Oh, yeah. Prof. Monson is saying the Afro-Sino Center is a great achievement as well. Did you forget to mention that?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Prof. Yeah, so like I was saying, so I would think that most Africans and African institutions and diplomats would say that their ability to get on the G20 will be one of their greatest achievements. And for me personally, like Professor Manson said, I think ASCIR has done some great work. We are super proud of the work we have done so far, and we look forward to doing more. We really look forward to doing more.
Yeah, I also add and say, yes, it's been a great achievement because the updates that you've been providing our community are immense because sometimes, it's difficult to substantiate some information without research, without proper, channels to be able to provide the reasonable responses the way you do. Otherwise, we'd be stuck at the point where we're saying still China shouldn't be in Africa or China is not a good partner for Africa. But we look forward, as I said, to hearing from you because you're really engaged in studying and learning and working with the partners like the AU to be able to provide this information that is very crucial in terms of global politics, international relations, which is very important for our being, survival, because the world cannot stop for us. It's us who are supposed to be able to know how to engage with the world. So I don't see a question here. And please feel free to speak. Ahin would want to hear some voices. I'm glad that you're putting your questions on the chat, but please feel free to unmute and talk. In fact, that's why we call this tea time. We don't have tea physically, we used to, but being online, sometimes we encourage you to grab a cup of tea, not coffee, for some reason, because we need to honor the tea, this being tea time. But please loosen up, ask questions, even introduce yourself. This is a chance to introduce yourself and say anything, comment, ask a question. So anyone? I see Dr. Monson is
Yeah,
unmuted.
I thought I might just say a couple of things. This is so interesting and helpful, Arhin, and coming from your background in international relations, I think one of the real benefits of this talk is that you put the China-Africa relationship in a global context. And the world really is shifting. And there's some kind of agency, I think, not just for Africa, but for other parts of the world that are starting to come into their own in big ways internationally. And I think that helps us because I think what you called this correctly, the scrutiny, makes it seem like China and Africa are just sort of like a binary, but they're greatly influenced and they influence us too. And I thought I would just give a shout out also to the role played by kind of everyday people and individuals. Like for your field, you really look at the level of the state. Sorry, but for example, in Kenya, you know, the government of Kenya has some pretty strong laws, for example, that protect the environment or that protect the rights of Kenyan citizens. But some of those were really breached by some Chinese activities in mining and things like that. But the Kenyan people didn't keep quiet. They kind of rose up and they made claims, not so much on the China side, but they said, hey, you know, Kenya government, you're supposed to be adhering to the law. Why are you making a deal with somebody who's not Kenyan to do something that isn't in line with our own government policies? So I think the role of everyday people is really positive. And then I'll just say one more thing because you mentioned, you know, Africans starting to give examples to the world. And I live now in Minneapolis, and many of you may know that we just recently had a lot of community response to the immigration activities of ICE here. And we were motivated by Nelson Mandela and other liberation movements that were peaceful and nonviolent. And we took some of those strategies. So yeah, it's going full circle for sure. So thank you so much, Arhin. It's lovely to see what you're doing with the center and your great work. So thanks so much for this talk.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Manson. Thank you. And Prof, just to add to what you said about what everyday people are doing to, you know, in shaping this, I will give it two examples. One was with the bauxite deal, which, you know, the Ghana-China Sino-Hydro deal was a huge deal. It became very topical. CSOs, civil society organizations, and Ghanaians stood up to say that, no, we are not going to allow you to mine in that forest reserve. And true to it, even though the government was insistent, that deal didn't go through because they refused to allow the Chinese mine the bauxite in that forest reserve. So that was a clear example of how not everyday people, you know, are also shaping, you know, how Africa engages with China. And again, this is why when I say the American people is important, this is why when countries where people are able to also speak to the government and also, you know, express themselves freely and rally together, just like it's going on in Minneapolis, we see real change. And that is why I keep, whenever I speak to American audience or even Chinese audience, to say that your biggest disadvantage in China is that you are not able to stand up to speak like people in Africa and in the US. And you need that. If China can be trusted as a global partner, the Chinese people's voices need to be heard. And it is from the people's voice that you know the principles of the country, right? So if I want to know the American principle and what Americans stand for, I don't listen to President Trump. I listen to what American people are saying, you know, or what the people in Minneapolis are saying, or what they are fighting for. That tells you what America stands for, you know. So that is very important and crucial. And I'm glad you brought that up, so that Africans will also stand up. And that African agency, when we talk about African agency, it shouldn't just be at the national policy level, but also at the level. So we've seen, again, like you said, in Kenya, people stand up to oppose. And the second example I wanted to give was Uganda. We actually used the Ugandan case to talk about, labor laws that were violated by Chinese workers. And that example has actually shaped the entire Chinese labor regulations or how they act on the continent. And it was just from people protesting in Uganda. And that was used vehemently by people. And now it's changing how Chinese treat their workers on the continent. So again, it didn't come from the government, it came from the people.
Great.
Thank you. Yeah, I love that piece where we're adding agency to include the common people's voices. It's not just the government speaking for the people, but the people themselves speaking for themselves and influencing the decisions that the government makes and how they position themselves with the partnerships, especially the international partnerships. So, any more questions? I don't see any on the chat. If somebody has something to say, I see we have students here. Please feel free to even introduce yourself. We want to know who you are. If you feel like you can just even say hi and let us know who you are, how you learned about the African Tea Time, that's important as well, because tea time is a place where we connect and engage as well. So if anybody, before we close, because it looks like we need to wrap up here, but if you want to unmute yourself and say something, you're free to. If not,
Students are so shy these days.
they are. I'm happy that you're here, but we would have loved to see you or hear your voices at least. But either way, we're glad that you joined us, and we hope that you've learned. I believe some or many of you would be from the International Relations Program. Maybe not, but we welcome you again. I had mentioned in the beginning that the next tea time is going to focus on education abroad students that participated in the Tanzania Partnership Program in 2025. I've added a link on the chat so you can view that program and see what it entails. It's partially sponsored. So if you're interested and you're a student, you'll really be happy to learn more about other parts of the world, and in this case, Tanzania. And also I added in the chat a link to register from the African Studies Center. So feel free to check out what other events are happening with the African Studies Center. And this time, maybe I'll welcome Arhin. If you have any closing remarks that you want to provide before we can close, you're welcome to. Arhin?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Yes. Thank you so much again, and to everyone who joined today. I'm so grateful for sharing this time with me and with the center. Professor Manson, thank you so much. It's always good to see you, and we are so grateful to you for everything. I just want to say that, especially to emerging scholars, that we really at this critical point in global history. I read somewhere someone said that we are fortunate or unfortunate. I mean, we're fortunate. I think it's fortunate to see a global pandemic and to see a real war, happen before our eyes in a span of 5 years, So it's rare. It's rare to see this, especially, and again, where we are talking about, a shift in the global order. This is very important for international relations students. And this is not a time to sit in the back seat. This is our era. This is the time to critically look at what is going on, assess, write on what is happening, write, share your views. I mean, let's challenge what is happening. Let's make our voices heard in this. And I think that it's important that whilst this is happening in our lifetime, that again, we shape that narrative. And we also, beyond shaping the narrative, shape the future that is going to happen. And for example, this appeal to, say, the Chinese people, it's working, it's happening. It's gradually, we are seeing that shift. So we really need to. And finally, I would just want to introduce the Afro-Sino Center to you. You can look us up at ascir.org. Our website is there. if you want to join us, just send us an email at info@ascir.org, and we're happy to welcome you to join our center and to work with you on shaping Africa-China engagement and discourse on the continent and beyond. So it's always a pleasure to be here. I'm so grateful for this opportunity, and even from today, I look forward to next year's tea time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Arhin. It's always a pleasure to host you. And I've added my email on the chat. If you have any questions, if you want to engage with the African Studies Center, we're open. Please, you're welcome. You can email me. You can go to our website and check out the information on there. And Arhin has added also the link to their organization, Afro-Sino Center of International Relations. You can also please feel free to look at what they offer. They're doing amazing work. So at this point, I want to conclude by saying thank you so much. We look forward to engaging with you again. Hope you have a good afternoon, good evening. Thank you, Arhin, so much.